Have you ever wondered why the world sometimes overlooks brilliance, not because it is small, but because it comes from a place they never expected? Have you ever noticed how some of the most powerful minds, scientists, CEOs, engineers, can spend years chasing a solution, only for the answer to come from someone they never saw coming? Because sometimes the greatest breakthroughs don't happen in billion-dollar laboratories. Sometimes they begin in a simple place where someone refuses to believe that the word impossible is real. And once again, that someone was Filipino. Before the applause, before the headlines, before the world whispered his name and rewrote its assumptions, there was just a man called Marco Rivera. Not a CEO, not a prodigy with awards framed on the wall, not the son of a billionaire whose legacy was paved before he could walk. He was simply the son of a quiet mechanic from Pampanga, a man whose greatest inheritance wasn't wealth, but wisdom, patience, and hands that understood machines the way poets understand language. Marco's father wasn't famous. No newspaper ever quoted him. No corporation ever placed him on a magazine cover. But in a small garage beside a rice field, under the dim glow of a single rusted bulb, he carried a mastery the world never thought to measure. He fixed broken engines, not with flashy equipment, but with calloused fingers and a soft-spoken faith that spoke louder than any degree ever could. And Marco, wide-eyed, observant, quiet, stood beside him almost every evening like a loyal shadow, while other children spent their afternoons chasing basketballs, collecting toys, or running through the barangay laughing without worry. Marco learned a different kind of childhood, not one built on noise, but on listening, not to music, not to television, not to the distractions that filled other homes, but to machines, engines that sputtered like tired lungs, motors that buzzed like restless thoughts, gears that clicked like nervous fingertips, old trucks that coughed like aging men, motorcycles that whined like children in need of comfort. To Marco, machines were never lifeless metal. They were alive, alive the way stories are alive, alive the way memories breathe, alive the way every broken thing still hopes to be understood, and every sound, a whisper, every vibration, a clue, every malfunction, a cry for help. There were nights his father would stop working, wipe sweat from his forehead, and look at Marco as if studying him. Then, with a gentle tap on the shoulder, he'd say, "Anak, machines are like people. They don't break without reason, and they don't speak loudly unless they're hurting." Those words stayed in Marco's heart long after the tools were hung, long after the garage closed, long after childhood drifted away. Sometimes, late at night, when most children slept soundly, Marco remained awake, listening to engines outside, memorizing the difference between a healthy hum and a suffering tremor. To the world, it was ordinary. To him, it was language, a language only a few ever bothered to learn. And perhaps that was the beginning, not of a career, not of recognition, but of purpose. Because long before Marco Rivera became the name that would travel across borders, long before experts debated how he heard what machines could not say, long before the moment that changed everything, he was just a boy standing beside his father, learning that sometimes the difference between failure and brilliance is not intelligence, but the willingness to listen. And Marco, from the very beginning, listened, not with pride, not with urgency, not with the arrogance of someone trying to prove himself, but with patience, with stillness, with the kind of quiet dedication that comes from love, not ambition. Because for Marco Rivera, machines were never just machines, they were stories waiting to be understood, problems waiting to be solved, journeys waiting to continue. And in his heart, even as a child, he believed something many adults forget. Nothing is truly broken, as long as someone still cares to fix it. Years later, after college diplomas had lost their shine and life settled into a quiet routine of long shifts and silent commutes, Marco found himself working in a modest manufacturing plant in Clark. No spotlight, no applause, no special title, just the familiar rhythm of engines, metal, and work that demanded precision. He showed up early. He stayed late. He fixed problems others missed, quietly, consistently, almost invisibly. Co-workers respected him, but few understood him. To most, Marco was just the reliable engineer who rarely complained and never bragged. But to the machines he worked on, he was something different. He was someone who listened. And sometimes, without even realizing it, the world watches those who work in silence. Then one ordinary Tuesday morning, while the plant hummed with its usual pace, Marco checked his email during lunch. Among updates, maintenance reports, and shift reminders was a strange message. No greeting, no corporate formatting. Just a subject line. Confidential, assistance request, advanced EV system. At first he almost deleted it. It looked like phishing, or spam, or one of those too-good-to-be-true opportunities that disappear the moment you click. But something, a gut feeling, a whisper, an instinct, made him open it. The first line made him sit straighter. We represent a European engineering consortium leading the next generation of electric mobility. He blinked. Read it again. Slowly. The message continued. They were behind some of the world's most advanced electric vehicles, the kind seen on dazzling stages at international expos, the kind reviewed by experts and envied by competitors, the kind only the wealthiest could buy. They were working on a new battery cooling system, something that would change the future of transportation and give them a head start worth billions. But something wasn't working. Temperatures surged unpredictably. Cells overheated. Safety protocols failed. Prototypes melted down in testing. Every attempt to fix the issue only revealed a deeper flaw. The project was days, maybe hours, from collapsing. And then came the line that left Marco frozen. We have been informed you solved a nearly identical failure pattern in a previous industrial application. Marco frowned. That project had never been public. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't global. It was just a malfunctioning cooling system in an industrial-grade motor assembly, something his company couldn't diagnose for months. He fixed it quietly. No promotions, no awards, just a nod and a paycheck. But somebody, somewhere, had seen what he did. A rumor traveled. A whisper moved. A name crossed oceans. His name. Marco Rivera. The email ended with a formal request. We would like you to join our core diagnostic team immediately. All expenses and arrangements have been made. We believe your approach may be the key. Marco read the message 3 times, then 6. His heart wasn't racing from excitement, but from confusion. Why him? There were engineers in Europe with 10 PhDs, experts who built satellites, robots, and microprocessors, teams with access to AI-driven diagnostics and supercomputers. What could a man from a garage in Pampanga offer that they couldn't? Doubt crept in first, then hesitation, then something softer, something like memory, his father's voice. Anak, necessity teaches what textbooks cannot. Maybe, Marco thought, this wasn't about status or credentials or prestige. Maybe it was about perspective, a way of thinking born from scarcity, not luxury, from creativity, not resources, from solving problems with hands and instinct, not just software and equations. Still, he wasn't sure, not until the final line of the message appeared, simple yet heavy. We need someone who can hear what the machine is trying to say. His breath halted. It felt as if someone reached across continents and spoke directly to the boy inside him, the one standing beside a dusty garage light listening to engines like they were alive. Within a week, plane tickets arrived. A formal NDA, a contract, a reservation under his name at a hotel he could never afford on his own salary. There was no time to process, no time to prepare. Just motion, paperwork, packing, passport checks. And then, a final quiet evening at home. Marco stood in front of a small shelf holding his father's old wrench, rusted, heavy, worn smooth from years of use. He didn't need it for the journey, but he took it anyway. Not as a tool, but as a reminder of where he began and what truly taught him. And so, with a steady breath and a heart full of uncertainty, not pride, Marco stepped onto a plane that would carry him across thousands of miles, into a world that didn't expect him, into a room full of people who doubted him, into a challenge even experts feared, but also into the moment destiny had been quietly shaping since the first time he heard an engine speak. Germany welcomed him the way winter always does, not with warmth, not with excitement, but with a cold silence that tested the spirit. The sky hung low and heavy, a blanket of steel-colored clouds hovering over the airport, as if the world itself was watching him, waiting to see whether he would rise or crumble. The air was sharp, the kind that bites the skin, burns the lungs, and reminds you instantly that you are far from home. No jeepneys, no warm laughter spilling from sari-sari stores, no smell of fried garlic or morning pain de sal, just stillness, efficiency, order. The engineering facility he was escorted to looked less like a workplace and more like a cathedral of technology. Towering glass walls reflected everything sharply. No room for imperfection, no softness, no warmth. Laser diagnostics pulsed rhythmically like heart monitors in an ICU. Robotic arms moved with surgical precision. Every surface gleamed. Every square meter felt intentional. It was a place designed for minds, not emotions. For brilliance, but not humanity. Everything was precise. Everything was controlled. Everything was measured. Down to temperature, airflow, timing, even the distance between people and machines. Everything, except the way they looked at Marco. Some eyes lingered with curiosity. Who is he? Why was he brought here? Some with polite neutrality, the kind that says, "We don't know you, but we'll tolerate you." Others carried skepticism, a quiet question hiding behind guarded expressions. What could someone like him possibly offer? Very few, if any, were impressed. Because Marco didn't fit the picture they had of someone flown in to save a failing billion-euro project. He wasn't tall and imposing. He didn't walk with the confidence of a man used to being obeyed. He didn't arrive carrying degrees printed in Latin or framed certifications. He didn't wear designer shoes polished to mirror perfection. His jacket wasn't tailored, his watch wasn't expensive, his voice was not commanding, not sharp, not dominant. Instead, he spoke softly, with a tone that made people lean in rather than recoil. He listened deeply, not waiting for his turn to speak, but trying to understand. And he observed quietly, not judging, not rushing, just absorbing. There was no arrogance in him, no desire to impress, just presence, a calm, steady presence that felt out of place in a building filled with pressure, timelines, and silent panic. Then there was the man who mattered most, the one whose approval could make or break everything. Dr. Friedrich Adler, sharp-eyed, stoic, precise to a fault. His reputation moved before he did. Stories whispered in hallways, spoken with equal parts fear and admiration. Some called him a genius. Some called him ruthless. Most called him necessary, because brilliance at this level often walked hand in hand with severity. Dr. Adler approached Marco not with interest, not with welcome, but with calculation. His gaze flicked over Marco's ID tag, then to his shoes, then his posture, as if assessing whether this man was a tool worth using or an error in the system. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't offer a handshake. He merely gave the smallest nod, cold, mechanical, as if acknowledging an item delivered, not a person arriving. To Adler, Marco wasn't a savior. He wasn't a strategist. He wasn't even a peer. He was simply a wild card, a last attempt. A desperate move before the project collapsed under the weight of expectations and failure. A gamble no one fully trusted. And yet, somewhere deep inside that cold, calculated silence, something was shifting. Because even if no one realized it yet, in that sterile building filled with fear, pride, and numbers, the quietest man in the room was about to become the one no one would forget. On Marco's third day inside the facility, the pressure in the air felt heavier than the steel machines surrounding him. People spoke less. Movements were sharper. Eye contact became something avoided, as if acknowledging each other meant acknowledging failure. Newspapers outside the company speculated. Investors whispered. Share prices trembled. Inside the lab. No one dared say the word aloud, but everyone felt it pulsing under the surface. Time was running out. That morning, they prepared the prototype as if it were a fragile patient in critical condition. Technicians checked connections twice. Engineers reviewed logs. Robots calibrated sensors with mechanical grace. Dr. Adler stood behind the control board, hands clasped behind his back, jaw clenched tightly enough to tense the muscles in his neck. No one breathed fully. Everyone waited. With emotion sharp enough to cut silence, Adler gave the command. Begin. A click, a low electrical pulse. The system stirred. At first, nothing. No alarms, no smoke, no resistance, just silence. Then, like a heartbeat finding rhythm, a low hum emerged, steady, smooth, controlled. For 3 fleeting seconds, the room tasted hope. Someone exhaled shakily. Someone smiled, just barely, as if afraid to disturb the moment. Even Adler's eyes softened. It was working. For the first time, it was working. But hope is a fragile thing. Without warning, the hum shifted, subtle at first, like a voice clearing its throat, then harsher. A jolt. A violent tremor pulsed through the system like a machine crying out in pain. Warning. Indicators began flashing. Panels turned red. Heat signatures spiked. The coolant chamber hissed, then erupted with steam, so sudden everyone instinctively stepped back. One engineer muttered something sharp in German, half anger, half disbelief. Another lowered his head, jaw tightening, as if trying to swallow the taste of defeat. Someone else slammed a binder shut. Pressure didn't just fill the room, it crushed it. Then came Adler's voice, low, controlled, but trembling with restrained fury. Shut it down. And just like that, the machine wound to lifeless stillness. No hum, no warnings, no movement, just a suffocating silence that settled over the room like an unwelcome guest. A silence heavy with 5 years of research, hundreds of millions invested, promotions promised, then quietly withdrawn, brilliant minds humbled, a deadline approaching like a storm no one could outrun. Failure wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. Then, in that heavy quiet, a voice emerged. Not loud, not demanding, not confident, just soft, careful, respectful, almost apologetic. May I try something? It wasn't a challenge, it wasn't arrogance, it was a question spoken by someone who understood how fragile pride could be. Every head turned toward him. Not with excitement, not with relief, but with disbelief, the kind that hangs between, who do you think you are, and what if? Adler's eyes narrowed. He didn't speak. He simply stared, evaluating the man who dared interrupt the gravity of defeat. Engineers exchanged looks, some skeptical, some annoyed. One intern whispered, barely audible, "He wants to touch it?" To them, Marco wasn't the answer. He was the last page in a manual everyone had already given up on. But despite the noise that wasn't spoken aloud, doubt, ego, frustration, Marco didn't shrink. He didn't apologize again. He simply waited, calm, steady, like someone who had stood beside many broken things before, and believed that broken did not mean hopeless. Marco didn't walk towards the machine like a doctor about to diagnose an illness. There was no urgency in his steps, no theatrics in his movements. He approached it the way someone approaches an old friend, with familiarity, with respect, with the quiet assurance of someone who knows he will not be rejected. His footsteps echoed softly against the polished floor, each step a reminder that he didn't belong there, at least not in the eyes of the people watching. Yet somehow, the machine seemed to recognize him, as if engines, not people, had been waiting for him all along. He didn't touch the sleek screens, the monitors filled with data streams, or the diagnostic interface that flashed numbers like a panicked heartbeat. No. Marco ignored them all. Instead, he placed his hand gently on the vibration housing. Just metal. Just surface. Just steel. But to Marco it was more than material. It was a pulse, a voice, a story trying to reach him. Engineers exchanged glances. One whispered sharply under his breath, "This is absurd." Another scoffed just loud enough to be heard. A young intern covered her mouth, not to hide laughter but confusion. Who still used touch in a world ruled by machines? But Marco didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and chose not to care, because he wasn't listening to them. He was listening to the machine. There is a kind of silence that isn't empty. A silence filled with concentration, presence, and connection. That was the silence now, the rhythm, the subtle knock beneath the hum, the uneven pause between cycles, so small the senses ignored it. But not him. To everyone else, the machine sounded broken, a malfunction, a failure. But to Marco, it was communication. It was a wounded voice trying to explain where it hurt. Then, without asking permission, without seeking approval, Marco reached for a tool. Not the most advanced one, not the digital one, a simple manual release. With a practiced twist, he opened a panel. Not the one the team believed was faulty, not the one they'd dismantled dozens of times, but a section no one had questioned. Because it wasn't supposed to be wrong. It was one of the facility's proudest innovations, a cooling manifold custom designed by one of Europe's most respected engineers. A design praised in conferences, featured in articles, celebrated as groundbreaking. A design no one dared touch. No one except Marco. He studied it, not with arrogance, not with triumph, but with the reverence of someone inspecting a wounded heart. His brow softened, his breathing slowed, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Not dramatic, not victorious, just true. "It's not the heat," he murmured. "It's the way the coolant moves." The sentence fell into the room like a stone into still water. Small, but impossible to ignore. Dr. Adler's eyes narrowed. A flicker, not of annoyance, but of interest, crossed his face. "What do you mean?" Adler's voice was controlled, but something softer hid underneath it. Curiosity. The first shift. Marco didn't answer immediately. He reached for a pen. Not a stylus, not a digital surface, just pen and paper, simple, ordinary, almost out of place in a facility where everything was built for precision. He drew, not equations, not graphs, but a shape, a curve, then another, then a pathway, a gentle bend where the original design forced a sharp turn, a smoother transition where turbulence once formed, a design that respected not theory, but behavior, a design based not on perfection, but understanding. Some stared, unable to process it. Others froze as realization crept into their eyes. And Dr. Adler, he stared longest, not because it was obvious, not because it aligned with data, but because it didn't. It was elegant, simple, human. The kind of solution no simulation predicted, no textbook suggested, no algorithm calculated, only someone who spent a lifetime listening, not just calculating, could see it. A single thought rippled through the silent room. This wasn't guesswork. This was mastery. And for the first time since Marco arrived, silence didn't mean dismissal. It meant respect. The team rebuilt the system according to Marco's design. Hours passed, then days, then finally, the new prototype stood ready. Everyone held their breath as the startup sequence began. Silence, then hum, then stability. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. No spikes, no alarms, no instability. For the first time in 5 years, the machine didn't fail. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "He did it." And Dr. Adler, he stepped forward, placed his own hand where Marco had placed his, and closed his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was not sharp, but humbled. "Teach us." News spread. Engineers from other divisions visited just to meet him, not because he was Filipino, not because he was lucky, but because he saw something no one else saw, not with pride, but with patience, not with arrogance, but with understanding. At the end of the day, Adler approached him. No arrogance, no superiority, just sincerity. The world underestimates where brilliance comes from. Marco smiled. Sometimes the world just forgets to listen. So if you ever feel small, unseen, dismissed because of where you come from, remember this. Greatness does not need permission. Respect does not need to be demanded. Sometimes, all it takes is one moment, one idea, one act of courage, to rewrite what the world believes. And when that moment comes, may you have the humility to step forward, the courage to speak, and the heart to listen. Because somewhere in this world, just like Marco, just like Raphael, someone is waiting to discover. Filipinos don't just work with skill. They build with soul.